Hey everyone. So we kind of left off abruptly with the last video. I only had about 15 more seconds or so left anyway. But we'll pick up there, and there was with Schopenhauer an explanation of how he believes our condition is typified by this constant unrest, right? Driven forth by this deep wanting that we have, this will itself that is kind of animating everything, as we said, in the phenomenal world, and that your life is like this boy here running down this hill, that you can't stop wanting this and you can't stop wanting that, that the momentum, the force underneath this will, just has you moving, and if you were to try to stop, you would just tumble over like this boy running down the hill. The other example that he gives us is he has this lovely metaphor where he talks about how if you were trying to balance a pen on the palm of your hand to keep it upright, you would have to keep moving your hand around constantly, even if the pen stays still and upright vertically. You have all this movement happening underneath it, right? So it's kind of like a metaphor for our life. If we want our life, our days, to be stable and to continue and to be standing, if you will, we have this will underneath moving all around, pushing us this way, pushing us that way. So this again is a bit of review, but worth pointing out again as we continue to unpack the reading on the vanity of existence and on the suffering of the world. And these are just that line from page 18 of your text. Our life resembles the course of a man running down a mountain who would fall over if he tried to stop and could stay on his feet only by running on, right? So what then do we have Schopenhauer saying with respect to, and here's a young Schopenhauer, what do we have him saying or thinking or believing about happiness? How then, if this is what life is, how do we understand happiness? And what role does happiness have for us? What do we mean by this? Certainly, we would think you, Schopenhauer, as a young man, were happy at some point. Maybe something happened that you're not so happy now. But look, he's writing this in his 20s, in his early 20s, and he's got a pretty substantial view on what the nature of happiness is. So we're going to talk about that as well. So he says happiness. Well, look. First, mostly we don't ever really attain it. Few people actually can say they are fully happy. You might be happy about this, you might be happy about that, but you're never really fully happy. And so there's that. And even when you are happy, let's say you are fully happy, it doesn't last, right? It's fleeting. You're always kind of on to the next thing. Something happens, you're suffering, something causes you some kind of pain, some kind of loss. Life throws many things at you, as we know today, right? So it's fleeting at best. And really, it doesn't quite matter. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, what is it? What does your happiness have to do with anything else going on in the world? We already said that your existence is accidental. So you could have not existed. Would the world be less happy for it? So Schopenhauer thinks it really doesn't matter. So he says on page 18, one strives his entire life for a happiness which, quote, he seldom attains, and even if he does, it is only to be disappointed with it. It is all one whether he has been happy or not in a life that consists of only transient present moments and is now at an end. So the last point I want to make about his characterization of happiness here is, it might sound counterintuitive, but it's not. So he describes it as negative. And he doesn't mean there, it could sound counterintuitive if you're thinking it's something bad, but that's not what he means by negative. By negative here, he means that happiness is really just the absence of pain or the absence of desire, right? Because for him, desire is the thing that actually causes us pain. Our desire, our wants, is really what sets us up to be disappointed or to feel like we don't have something or we're at a loss of something or that we're chasing after something. So it's our desires that really get us on the way toward pain. So happiness is removing that desire and extinguishing that pain. So it's described as the lack of desire, lack of pain, or the absence. And that's what he means by happiness being negative. It's not something that is added to your life. It's rather the taking away of some pain that you had, or the taking away of the desire that you had. And in this way, he very, very much is in sympathy with Buddhist thought. The Buddhists believed there were Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truths which, if you followed, if you kept in mind and integrated into your life, you could yourself attain a bit of tranquility and calm in your life. And the first noble truth is that all life is suffering. All life is sorrowful. The second noble truth of the Buddhists was that suffering is a result of your desires, of what you attach yourself to, of what you try to chase after in life. And that third noble truth is that suffering can be overcome, that with the elimination of those desires, you can mitigate that suffering. The fourth noble truth points you toward the Buddhist path for overcoming those desires. So you have Schopenhauer here, not so far away from Buddhist thought, in his description of what happiness is. He says on page 3 through 5, just as we are conscious not of the healthiness of our whole body, but only of the little place where the shoe pinches, so we think not of the totality of our successful activities, but of some insignificant trifle or other which continues to vex us. On this fact is founded what I have often before drawn attention to, the negativity of well-being and happiness, in antithesis to the positivity of pain, right? So pain actually makes us feel something. That's what he means by the positivity. Not that it's good, but that pain actually adds a feeling, not a good feeling, but it adds a feeling to our existence, whereas happiness is a taking away of that feeling of pain. And he points out that, look, you could be really healthy, but if you're walking around and your toe is being pinched by your shoe, that's going to annoy and bother you and kind of ruin your walk, even though everything else is just great about you. So it's just even a little bit of pain can have a big effect on you. And think about your life too, where things might be relatively good for you. You might be healthy, your friends, you might have good relationships, all of that stuff. But as soon as something goes a little wrong for you, you fixate on that, right? So just keep that in mind as we go forward here and we talk about Schopenhauer's notion of happiness. So to get at a better understanding of his view on pleasure, the experience of pleasure, the experience of pain, he says, compare the feelings of an animal engaged in eating another with those of the animal being eaten. right? I mean, it's kind of a morbid, sick image, but the point is well taken. It's probably better to be the animal eating another animal. But even that joy doesn't match the pain, right, in terms of its intensity, in terms of its kind of quality, if you will. Doesn't match the kind of pain it would be to experience being the one eaten. So Schopenhauer says the highest highs that we might experience, those great pleasures we might experience in life, well, yeah, they're great, but they're really not as intensely felt as the lowest lows, as those moments of pain and suffering in our life. He then goes on to compare human life with animal life to kind of, again, shed some light on this notion of happiness and what we might mean by happiness and how we experience happiness. He says, look, all animals and human beings have this in common. We share physical pleasures of health, food, and protection, and pretty much our lives are directed toward maintaining or procuring those things, health, food, and protection, both animals and human beings. Human beings, however, have a greater or more intense range of emotions as we strive for these pleasures. We have a kind of a more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of what can please us. And Schopenhauer, as we'll see, attributes this to us having a greater intellect than animals. So as a result, since the richness, the variety, the range of emotions that human beings have is larger than what animals have, our emotions themselves, when we attain these things that we go after, we'll experience them more pleasurably. And when we don't succeed in getting the things we want, or if those things are taken away from us, we'll experience pain more intensely than animals do. He says the greater the intellect, the greater the emotional pain, because we care for things that aren't necessarily right in front of us. We have fears and hopes. We have fears about the future. We have hopes about the future. We can think about things that aren't just immediately in front of us. And we can anticipate and expect. And we can be scared in ways of, what's to come, not just around the corner, but, next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we can be uncertain and we can have that anxiety, which for animals is not quite felt in the way that it is for human beings. Animals are responding more immediately to their surroundings. He says our joys and sorrows can add up over time. We can remember things, the good times, we can remember the bad times. We base our experiences, current experiences, and project future experiences on what we remember and how we add up those joys and sorrows. So that's another way in which our emotions of pleasure and pain are felt more strongly. And I want to call your attention to this point that he makes about human beings, and I use a picture here from a film by Paul Thomas Anderson, the director of The Master. Here you see a photo or still shot from that film of Joaquin Phoenix, who's playing Freddie Quell. And I think Phoenix exemplifies something that Schopenhauer points to, something that he points to as really the cause of a lot of our pain. So I'm going to read here and then unpack it a little bit. Schopenhauer says, more closely considered, what happens is this. He, the human being, deliberately intensifies his needs, which are originally scarcely harder to satisfy than those of the animal. so as to intensify his pleasure, right? So we dream up bigger and bigger and create more needs for ourselves, create more demands for ourselves. Luxury, confectionery, tobacco, opium, alcoholic drinks, finery, and all that pertains to them, right? All the things, not only the basic needs that we really need to stay alive, but everything we throw on top of that to enjoy and have pleasure in and luxury in. To these is then added also, as a result of reflection, a source of pleasure and consequently of suffering available to human beings alone, and one which preoccupies us beyond all measure, indeed more than all the rest put together, our ambition and our sense of honor and shame. In plain words, what we think others think of us, right? Think about how we might go around torturing ourselves, thinking and caring so much about how other people see us, how other people view us. Schopenhauer says, this in 1,000 often curious shapes then becomes the goal of all those endeavors of his which go beyond physical pleasure or pain. The very need we have to feel loved, to be appreciated, to be part of other people's lives, to be viewed in a way in which we feel cared for, where we feel like people are paying attention to us and loving us. That need that we have is the cause of so much pain, Schopenhauer will argue. And I think this character, Freddie Quell, certainly experiences a good bit of that. A character who you can argue is really just in search of being loved by someone, but does many things to undermine his attempt to find that love in others. So we torture ourselves in many ways, most of all in caring what others think of us. So this comes on page 7 of the reading. The human life versus the animal life. He says the animal lacks both anxiety and hope because its consciousness is restricted to what is clearly evident and thus to the present moment. The animal is always just present in the moment, and this gives the animal a air of wisdom. You know, the animal is always appears to be going along with whatever nature would have the animal do, however the nature would have the animal be. Remember, Sartre argues that sometimes we human beings we're at odds with what nature would tell us to be, but animals are not. Animals live according to what their nature dictates for them. So they're limited to the present, and they appear to have a certain kind of wisdom to their being, as if they are at peace with what they are and what there is in this world. So I want to stop there, this lecture, and we will pick up with Schopenhauer's understanding of the view of life a bit more in the next video.